Is it recording? Oh yeah, I think it is. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Shohini and I am a home chef. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to equip you with lots of tips and tricks on how to use your leftovers in the small little Tupperwares that we all put away in our fridge. It's going to show you how to think about incorporating those things into a whole new meal, hopefully. You are thinking that this is going to take loads of time. Let me correct you and say that I'm going to try and do this while we do this video, and hopefully talk you through the process of how to change how you're thinking about your meals and your food. So my aim with this is to make a lunch for myself today and hopefully a lunch takeaway box for my partner to take to work tomorrow. I've got 2 boxes of very different meals that I made during the last week, and there's little bits of it left, so not enough for like 2 portions essentially, and that's what I'm going to try and get out of it. So this is some cauliflower stem, some cauliflower leaves, little bits of cauliflower, and then carrots, parsnips. This was from a kind of I guess Israeli inspired roast that I did on the pan. This is a smoked aubergine with a miso tamarind sauce. I've also got a whole box of rice. So this is actually a fair bit of rice. It's a little bit old, so it's quite dry. And I'm just gonna break up the big clumps of rice as I speak. But this sort of rice is perfect for a fried rice recipe. We eat rice for dinner pretty much every day with lots of different things. But what happens as a result is we make rice in our rice cooker and there's like a little bit left. And that's not enough for a whole of the meal. It's not enough for a whole of the dinner. And what I do is I try and collect it in this box because again, we kind of like eating fresh rice every day and it doesn't take very long to make. So this is probably the combination of like 3 days of like fresh rice. And like you can see, this is quite dry. This is tip number 1. Try not to think of your ingredients that you have, and this could be honestly whatever. Try not to box them up into separate categories. What we often end up doing is, say if we have somewhat Chinese inspired ingredients or Indian inspired ingredients, we try and box them up into only using them for that particular cuisine. Thinking of ingredients in terms of their flavor profile instead of which part of the world they come from. For example, I don't just use miso in Japanese food. I will use it in whatever food I want to be using it in, and this doesn't have to be a particular cuisine, but I use it for its umami saltiness and its slightly dark color. So whenever you have a whole host of ingredients, like today, I have this cauliflower and I have this aubergine. They are in theory very different cuisines, and I did make them for completely separate meals. Actually, the aubergine is sour and a bit sweet and smoky, and the cauliflower that I've got is quite like paprika heavy. It's got some barberries, so it's sour as well, and it's quite smoky as well. So I'm breaking it down away from those cuisines that I made them originally for that meal and bringing them into kind of like a common bracket where the flavors can match up. This allows you to kind of look at things in almost like a fresh light. So if you've got random little things that you might have made for separate occasions, separate meals, and you have little bits of it left, try and think about what the flavors of those things are and maybe what the ingredients you used were, and try and match them up in a way that would always work. And I kid you not, this works with pretty much everything. I'm gonna switch my wok on. I've got a couple of tablespoons of oil in there. Now you can use whatever fat you want. I often go for mustard oil because I feel like it adds a whole like fresh zinginess to dishes, and it is my go-to oil, which I'll be talking about a lot more on this channel. What I often do is I keep out a few jars of pastes and condiments that I have, probably more than I need. I keep them in front of me so I can kind of match the flavors to what I'm thinking about going into this. So at the moment, I'm thinking about quite like a spicy, garlicky fried rice with the cauliflower, the aubergine. I've got a couple of eggs as well. And I've got a couple of sauces. I'm gonna start adding things and then we'll go to tip number 2. I will make a kind of fresh base to the dish. So obviously I'm gonna be chopping my onion and chatting to you guys while I do this. So excuse any loud chopping board sounds. Now I'm just gonna fry this onion. And with the fresh ingredients, this is continuation of tip number 2, by the way. Ensure that you're cooking the fresh things first and then adding your leftovers right at the end, because again, remember that they're already cooked, and you can obviously recook them, but if you're adding fresh things, do those first. This is a really fun trick, which I don't think enough people talk about. This is tip 2, part A, let's say. Chop your vegetables in different ways, and this means they cook in different ways. So for example, I've chopped half my onion. Let's show you actually. I've chopped half my onion, and the second half of this onion I'm actually gonna slice up so it's got some slithers of onion, as well as like the base, which is gonna be the small pieces. This is always something I do quite naturally, but I would encourage you to do this, especially in this sort of leftover thing, because just doing like a little variation of a technique really takes this kind of, let's say, somewhat mundane base of a dish into something quite exciting, and you have 2 different textures of onions this way. So the longer pieces of onions are going to be a bit more jammy, and the smaller pieces of onion are going to be a bit more like crispy and also blend into the base quite well. Often you can just do it with an onion, but I find it a really good way to use up scraps of vegetables. So what I do during the week is, if I have leftover bits of random little packets of vegetables, or like the outside of a cabbage, I keep them all in a Ziploc bag, and then when I'm making something like this, I take it out and I just chuck them all into the base. I'm just frying this off at the moment, not using anything else apart from just the oil. I'm just browning them, and with that, we can go on to tip number 3. Don't be afraid of high heat. Now, this is a kind of motto I go by with most of my cooking. I use a gas hob, so if you have a gas hob, things are really hard to burn unless they're powdered spices. And using that heat introduces, firstly, the browning, which is the lovely like caramelization, but also it creates almost like a bit of a smoky flavor, which is really good for this sort of dish, again, when you're trying to zhuzh something up into not being very stale. We're not chopping garlic today. We are using some garlic granules, which is a great cheat. I always have some in my cupboard. Garlic powder, garlic granules, they're great. I'm gonna introduce some new pastes and new condiments to match what I think my leftover overall flavors are. This amazing hot broad bean paste. This is something I always have on my pantry shelf. I'm gonna be doing a little video on how to set up your pantry for this sort of cooking, which is a little bit ad hoc. This is really nice and umami. It's quite spicy, but not like crazy spicy. It's lovely to cook off. So I'm gonna add a nice teaspoon of this. For example, if you've got leftovers that are quite tomatoey, use some sun-dried tomatoes. And it's a nice way to like oomph that overall flavor without, again, having to create a whole new thing. Add my 2 aubergine slices. So like I said, this has got this like miso caramel with a bit of tamarind. So I'm gonna add that sauce first and cook it off. That sizzles so good. Break them up in the pan. I'm all for all these cooking shortcuts, because for home cooks, honestly speaking, washing up is just as big of a deal as like cooking. Tip number 4. To get out of your head a little bit when it comes to cooking. And I feel like we all fall into this sort of trap where we get afraid of too many flavors, too much layering. And that is something that I really want to tell you is okay to break out of. I love layering lots of strong, bold flavors, especially when creating something like quite new, using up older things. So at this point, I'm gonna add my Mexican Colombian inspired hot sauce. And you might be thinking, why am I layering a Chinese hot broad bean paste with this sort of sauce? And it's because the flavor profiles, even though they come from very different parts of the world, somewhat meet, okay? They are a little bit funky and fermented, they are spicy, and I am not afraid to layer these sort of things. And I feel like this is something that we could all really benefit from instead of going out and buying lots of new things to cook with. Use what you've already got. Use them to complement each other with some high heat in the background. Time to introduce the carrot into this. And the reason I didn't introduce this earlier is because I kind of want it for its textural element instead of frying it off like I did with the cabbage and the aubergine. So because the aubergine is a little bit mushy, the cauliflower also is pre-cooked, it's been cooked a few days ago. It's not gonna have the crunch element, which you don't need in every single dish, but in a fried rice sort of thing, it's quite nice to have a variation of textures. So I'm adding the carrot later because I almost want it to be a bit crunchy. Now you can do this sort of element with radish, cauliflower stem, broccoli stem, anything that's got a bit of a bite basically, and that doesn't need to be super cooked for it to be edible. This is a really good way to not waste stuff, and if there's one thing that I would believe is my forte, it's this. Like, I love using random bits of things to make a whole new thing. I find it really fun, very creatively challenging. Often it gives me a lot of new ideas as well while I'm doing this sort of thing. Okay, so I've added the carrot. I want it to remain crunchy, so we're not gonna cook it for very long. And then I'm gonna add all of this cauliflower. A lot of that stem from the cauliflower, in it goes. Obviously, it's helpful if you have a carb that's pre-cooked. For example, I could add raw pasta into this, top it off with some stock or some hot water, and just put the lid on and let it cook, and we've got a whole packed vegetable flavor pasta situation. You could also just boil some noodles separately, top this off on that dish. Hopefully, looking at something like this, it will inspire you to get in your kitchen, take out those random boxes at the back of your fridge and get cooking. So my last tip is to keep all your scraps during the week. We often fall into this tendency where we get rid of things, we throw things away quite easily. And I don't know if you do this, you might not do this already, and in that case, that's amazing. But hopefully it's to tell you how to make something quite innovative with what you've got left. You might be the sort of person that just heats up what you've got already and eats it as it is. This is something that you can do as a little variation to that. I'm gonna chop up a couple of these cauliflower leaves and stems. And the way I'm gonna do that is by using these scissors. I'm not taking it out of the pan. Like I said, I don't want a dirty chopping board at this point. So I lift it up with my scissors. I hold it down with my spatula and I just do a chop. I'm gonna add my egg in at this point. This is obviously entirely optional. I'm adding the egg in for a little bit of creaminess and to kind of bind the rice to all the rest of the veg. So here we go with all my rice. I did do a little taste and it didn't actually need anything else. Now sometimes I would want to amp up the flavor in a particular way by adding something else. So today I did have a little bit of paprika out. I had some tamarind out again to enhance those flavors that were already in those dishes. But it really didn't need anything. I think it was super nice and salty. It had that nice kick from the paste and the sauce that I added. I've now added my egg, my rice. I'm just incorporating it all together. And again, this whole time the heat has been on high. And with that rice especially, it's gonna just bring it back to life. It's summing up the tips and tricks, is to be a bit flexible, to adapt with what you've got in your kitchen. Don't go out and buy fresh new ingredients just to make a leftover dish. It's kind of pointless. It's showing you how I make my lunch on a pretty regular basis, actually. It's quite fun to think about food in this way and think about food in different flavors and different elements instead of just boxing them up into parts of the world. And of course, that is a whole other sector of cooking, but this is, I guess, focusing on the home side of things. You can hear the rice popping in the background, which I love. Because you are using a high heat as well, this is just something to be mindful of. It's not part of the tricks. Keep adding little drizzles of oil. It's not gonna make the dish super oily, but you're trying to rehydrate, bring those things back to life. So don't be afraid of adding little drizzles of oil and topping off with flavor and not just sticking to what you started off with. It's okay to add even, another big spoon of this if you think it wants more spice or it needs a bit more saltiness. And yeah, so my dish is ready. I'm super hungry and it is packed with nutrients. To me now, that has changed personality almost from being 3 different Tupperwares of 3 different meals. It's now just a lovely new dish. So thank you very, very much for watching and hope to see you back very soon. If you like my content and you are connecting with me, please like and subscribe. Leave me a comment if you have any suggestions for future videos. I'd love to hear as I am building my channel. Hope to see you again very soon. Just a little disclaimer. I hope you didn't think this was a recipe video, because obviously you're not going to have the same leftovers that I've got. Yeah, don't try and replicate this recipe. Just think how I was thinking, try and follow those tricks and see where it gets you.